This week on Quality Digest Live, we chat with Neil Polhemus of Stat Graphics Technologies about SPC, big data, and more.
That's right. Plus, how broken is your business model? We'll find out when we come back.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for May 25th, 2018. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
That he is, and I'm Quality Digest publisher Mike Richmond. Well, you know, industrial statistical analysis, Dirk, it's one of the most consistent areas and focus of interest amongst our faithful QD audience.
Yeah.
However, you'll notice, if those of you who watch the show a lot, that Dirk and I rarely cover this topic here on Quality Digest Live. Why is that, Dirk?
Why is that?
I wonder why that
I
is.
don't know.
Well, quite frankly, it's no surprise to any of you out there, neither of us quite have the chops to really delve into the intricacies of statistical process control, big data, and design of experiments and the like. But fear not, because on today's show, we're going to be helped out by one of the leading statisticians working in the field today. He's the Chief Technology Officer of Stat Graphics Technologies, as well as the author of the recent book, Process Capability Analysis, Estimating Quality. Neil Polhemus, welcome to Quality Digest Live.
Hey guys, thanks for inviting me.
Hey, Mike, I'm sorry, Neil, as Mike mentioned, neither one of us, we're statistically illiterate. I mean, we can just, barely count or change. And I know that that's probably also true of a lot of people in our audience, and yet these same people have to make decisions about their company's processes and outputs, and very often they do it with a minimum amount of knowledge of statistics, or sometimes they just grab a piece of statistical software and plug a bunch of numbers in it and hope it comes up with the right thing. Is that dangerous?
You know, I gave a talk last week at a symposium here in Virginia, a symposium on data science and statistics. One of the speakers showed a slide that dated all the way back to the 1960s. That showed how data should be analyzed. Now, there were three individuals standing there. One was a computer operator. His task was to grab the relevant data. His left was a statistician, and on his right was a subject matter expert. Now, the message of the slide was that none of the three had all the skills necessary to properly extract and interpret the relevant information in the data. You know, that said, I'm a big fan of teaching data analysis techniques to subject matter experts. They're really the only ones who know whether something that appears to be statistically significant has any practical significance at all. In the era of big data where everything is statistically significant, where all of your p-values are zero, practical significance is really paramount. On the other hand, because you have a large number of variables, you do need some statistical expertise to find the needles in the haystack. So to answer your question, yes, it can be dangerous to run statistical models that you don't understand. But it can also be dangerous to let the statistician analyze data when he doesn't understand the process from which it came. The idea of us all working together, data scientists, statisticians, subject matter experts, that's what it's going to take going forward.
It's interesting. I hear you say that. It reminds me of that classic story we always talk about with the blind men and the elephant, right?
Right.
It's like they all kind of have their own little piece of the elephant that they're kind of touching, and they're like, well, it's like a tree, or it's like a whip, or whatever. I mean, that's kind of analogous to the same thing you're talking about here.
Well, it's been that way since 50 years at least. That was the 60s when that was first that slide was first made.
Yeah, and with more information, it's only getting worse. Well, you and I had a conversation that we published in Quality Digest earlier this week, where we talked about a lot of these issues, and I hope everybody out there will have a chance to read it. One of the things that you talked about in there was sampling bias. And kind of the danger of sampling bias. And of course, that's going to negatively affect the reliability of any analysis. So what are some indications of bias that you think our audience should be aware of going into an analysis?
I had a really great privilege of learning statistics from Stu Hunter. He's one of the best-known industrial statisticians. He's authored many books, including Statistics for Experimenters, written many articles. One thing he taught us was that all data are not created equal. You can have a lot of data, but if the relevant factors were never changed, or if multiple factors were changed in unbalanced ways, it's hopeless to expect to see what the underlying relationships actually look like. In the case of designed experiments, we're moving more and more toward computer-generated designs, optimal designs, that sort of thing. And what you see is a lot of interest in something called an alias matrix. Now, an alias matrix shows how effects that are not in the model, interactions perhaps, bias the effects that are in the model. In fact, our 18.2 release that will come out with this fall, a maintenance release, will add a method for obtaining what are called alias optimal designs. Those are experimental designs that are constructed in such a way that it minimizes the bias caused by these external effects that are not in the model. Now, in general, though, it's a question of making fair comparisons. If you're trying to compare two methods, perhaps a new method with an old method, it's important that you hold everything constant as much as possible when you collect those different data sets. And that requires much more than a computer program. It requires intelligent sampling.
Well, Neil, you work with a lot of clients, and I think it's fair to say that you have your ear to the ground when it comes to what people are doing and what they need to be doing. What are some of the things that you think people are struggling with as it relates to technology? Of course, technology is changing very quickly, but technology and quality and how that affects the outputs that people are trying to improve.
Well, paradoxically, the biggest problem right now seems to be that we have too much data. It's always been the case that getting your data in the right format to be analyzed is a huge task. Often takes longer than doing the analysis. Now that you have thousands of variables and millions of records, the task of getting the data in the right format is even harder. At the same time, what you find is that when you're working with big data, many of the statistical methods that we've all learned, which are based on small sample statistics, don't work anymore. You try doing an analysis of variance or a regression, and we're used to relying on p-values to tell us whether something is statistically significant or not, right? When you have millions of data points, those p-values are always going to be zero. Rounding alone is enough to make two huge data sets appear to be significantly different. There's also a strong move underway these days toward the use of machine learning techniques that rely on fast computers. These are techniques that weren't around when people my age went to school. And they're also not covered in many Six Sigma training programs. I'm talking about classification trees, random forests, clustering, neural networks, bootstrapping, and so forth. So what it's going to require is a fair amount of retraining. And finally, there are also big challenges in trying to visualize big data. You can imagine a scatter plot of a million data values, right? It looks like a black blob. It's not very useful. So what we need is new methods for visualizing these millions and millions of records that people have.
Well, Neil, even if it's, when you say visualize, do you mean literally the way we visually display this data, or are you saying there is different types of statistical processes or analyses that have to be done when you're using big data as opposed to when you're using small data?
Well, a lot of the models that we use, regression analysis, analysis of variance, and so forth, they're still useful. An R-squared statistic, for example, is still a good summary of how well you fit the data, even if there are millions and millions of observations. The problem comes when you want to see a plot of the fitted model or a plot of the residuals, that sort of thing, because there's just so many observations that it's hard to pick out the interesting ones. But there are techniques. There are things like hexagonal binning and so forth that let us make useful plots even when we do have millions of observations.
Well, and everything we're talking about here really it comes down to this idea that you have data. Data is fairly easily accessible these days, but information, you just mentioned it, there really is what the end game is to derive information from that, actionable information. So how do these world-class companies take that data, turn it into information, then use it to improve their processes?
Well, the best companies, I think data analysis is part of the culture. They do evidence-based decision making, right? Decision makers in those companies insist on facts, not opinions. Whether we're talking about marketing, we're talking about R&D, we're talking about day-to-day operations. There's really no excuse today not to support your recommendations with data. Now, the best companies also worry about quality, not just today, but also out into the future, right? They do things like accelerated life testing, time series forecasting. All of these are vital to be sure that the quality you build into your product today is still there throughout its useful life. And I think the final thing you see in the best companies is that they look at the data in real time. They don't just collect the data, file it away, and pull it out when they have problems. They look at it on an ongoing basis. And they're also certain that the people that are running the process, not just the supervisors, have a chance to see the data. If they own the data, they're much more likely to do what's necessary to make a quality product.
Well, Neil Palhumis, thank you for joining us today on our show. Neil is, of course, the CTO of Stack Graphics Technologies. He's also the author of the recent book, Process Capability Analysis, Estimating Quality. So, Neil, thanks again for joining us here on Quality Digest Live.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it.
We'll talk to you soon. Thanks,
See you,
Neil. Good stuff there. Yeah, Neil's a great guy. We had a really good conversation. We had that one. We had another good conversation as well. And then some of the same areas, but expanded a little bit more too. So check out the article that we wrote, I wrote on that earlier this week. Sure. All right. Well, the winds of change are blowing, Dirk. They're blowing. Actually, it's blowing here today. It's raining.
Yeah, I know.
It's kind of surprising in late May. But they're actually not just blowing. They're howling, if you think about it. And they're howling loudly. And if you don't think that these changes affect you and your organization, well, you're probably just not paying attention because they're affecting us, they're affecting everybody. And that's the central theme in the article. How broken is your business model, which ran in Wednesday's issue of the Quality Digest newsletter. You can see it right there. The author is Steve McKeon. He's a branding expert, and he's also the president of a marketing agency. And all that really puts him squarely in a position to know whence he speaks when it comes to change. He's a marketer. He's kind of in the same analogous business to what we are here. He's working with clients. He's trying to look at brand value and trying to deliver value in terms of what these companies want to do in the marketplace.
Sure.
And it's changing very fast. We see with Google and all these different companies that are kind of chipping away at the value prop for a lot of media companies. It's happening all over. And for people in his space too, they're also sitting there saying, well, how do we deliver value? Well, you deliver value by coming up with good ideas to help your organizations prosper, right?
Right.
And he quotes something in this article of his, which I really liked a lot, because it's one that I think about. It's a quote that you see in a lot of different ways, and it's been attributed to different people, but it's that nothing so concentrates the mind as the sight of the gallows. It's a quote from Samuel Johnson. I've heard it from different people too. And McKee references that in his piece. Really what's happening here is what he's talking about is when disaster is imminent, when you're faced with those gallows as a company,
right.
You start to really focus on, well, what is it that we do and why are we doing it? And try to overcome the critical failures and take steps to address them.
Sure.
The question is, can you do that before you get to the gallows? Can you do it when you say,
better.
well, there might be gallows over there. I better try to change before we get executed. And the example he uses, and it's a good one, the example he uses is Toys R Us. As you know, Toys R Us recently filed for bankruptcy.
Yep.
Now, of course, that's bad for Toys R Us investors, employees, the board, everything else. But think about, for instance, Hasbro and Mattel.
Sure.
Okay? their business model was wrapped up intricately in the Toys R Us business model. I mean, they're maybe not far behind.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if they don't challenge themselves to really discover the, what you call the inherent value of their brands, why they're in business, what they're there to do, then they may not succeed either. I mean, they could think of themselves as a toy maker, right? If you're Hasbro, you're Mattel, you can think of yourself as a toy maker, right?
Yeah.
But you could also consider yourself maybe in the entertainment space or the education field.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of different ways to think about yourself other than just as a toy maker, because if you think about yourself as a toy maker and the #1 toy retailer in the world goes under, there's still Amazon, but then the pricing pressure that Amazon could put on you is such that you're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
But if you can break out of that mold and say, well, what else is it that we do? What is our culture that we can adapt from one thing to another? Then you're in a bit of a better shape. I mean, you don't want to be locked into doing the same old thing in the same old way. I mean, it's really the recipe for disaster that McKee is talking about here. When I think about this, I think about it as risk management.
Sure.
I mean, really, it's no different from having suppliers all over the world as opposed to in one place.
Yeah.
The classic example of that was the Fukushima disaster in Japan. Knocked out a heck of a lot of electronic companies. It hurt them badly because a lot of suppliers were right there.
Yeah. If you got all of your suppliers, if you got either your suppliers or your distributors all in one basket, then that's
good.
That's not a good idea,
no bueno.
Right.
And the exercise you want to do is a SWOT analysis, right? I mean, typically you do the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, so you can know, or you can try to determine as best as you can where your company is most likely to fail, and then you need to take steps to circumvent that failure. I'm a big game guy. I like sports and games and stuff. I mean, there are certain games like basketball or hockey, chess is another good one, where you're either kind of playing defense or you're playing offense.
Right.
And you want one to lead to the other, but really in business, you need to do both at the same time.
Yeah.
And what McKee is saying here is, you don't want to just think about it as, okay, well, our business model is broken, right? And we have to take steps to address that. But also, you want to say, well, competitively, what can I do to help break my competitor's business model, right? What pressures can I put on my competitor? And this can be pricing pressures, branding pressures, new release pressures, any of those pressures that you can put on their model that you can kind of swoop in and pick up the pieces if and when they break.
Yeah.
It's a good thought. I mean, you're playing defense, you're thinking about how your model's broken, but okay, how is the next guy's model broken? Because he or she probably has similar problems that we're having, but maybe they have different problems too, so you want to think about those kind of things. I mean, really the idea here, the takeaway here, the key takeaway is threats, you want to transform them into opportunities, and that's kind of a hackneyed thing, but it's true. I mean, every threat contains the seeds of opportunity. Every change, because it's change. You're going to have to change what you're doing to address that outward pressure, and it's evolution, man. I mean, evolution only works if there's an external pressure that forces the organization, or the organism to change, and that's the only way it works.
What you just described, I think, is probably the best description of what risks and opportunities mean when you talk about ISO 9001, because a lot of people say, well, I understand identifying risk.
Right.
What do you mean identifying opportunities? I mean,
same size of the same coin.
Yeah, different sides of the same coin, or maybe the same size.
Yeah, same size.
Right.
Different sides of the same coin, exactly, yeah.
All right. Okay. Beacon Quality recently announced 3 winners for the inaugural, this is the first time they've done it, Champions for Quality Awards. They did this earlier this month. Now this is interesting because this is the only quality awards program that's where people are nominated on and voted by their quality professional peers. So rather than an outside organization looking at what you've done and so forth, your peers are nominating you for this award. So because they know what you're doing, they're kind of on the ground floor with you. They see what you're doing day in and day out.
Sure.
So it's pretty interesting. Beacon Quality, they're developers of mobile auditing software. They created this program this year to recognize those in the quality profession who have advocated for exceptional quality at their plants or at their company and on a global scale. And they invited the quality industry to submit their nominees, remember this is peers, and their inspiring stories of the positive impact these individuals have made. And the purpose of the Catalyst Award, as it's called, is to recognize someone who is a catalyst for change within their company. And this can be accomplished by starting programs or implementing change and, more important, creating real results. The nominees were narrowed down to a handful of finalists, and eventually 3 winners were chosen. And today we are joined by Thomas Schulte, a QA technician with Gertz Industries, and one of the winners of this year's Catalyst Award. Welcome, Thomas.
Hi, guys.
How are you? Well,
Doing well.
Thomas, maybe you can kick us off here with tell us a little bit about what Gertz Industries does.
So Gertz Industries is known as a power packager. We take industrial power units, primarily large generators, and we package them into a package that can be used for mobile use or stationary use. We will take a generator, we'll put it into an ISO shipping container that's made one trip to the U.S. from China, fix all the dents, put in some airflow louvers, some access doors, a fuel tank, a silencer, some electronic controls, switchgear controls, and then set it all on a chassis so it can be hauled anywhere you want it. We can also do this as a stationary unit where it can be used for backup power and whatnot. And then we can also do stuff that's more towards the alternative energy, towards wind energy and solar energy, where we can create a battery storage container for the batteries that are needed to hold that power before it goes on the grid. We can create protective packaging for the inverters that are used to transform that from DC to AC. Just all sorts of things. If you need an industrial package, an industrial enclosure, we can do it.
Wow.
We've got the engineers to design whatever you want.
Well, and from what I understand, just kind of reading up on you before the show, you're fairly new to the company. I guess you've only been there for about 4 years, since 2014. And in that amount of time, from what I read, you have gotten them on board with up and running with ISO 9001 2015, which is a huge accomplishment by itself.
No doubt, yeah.
And decreased their warranty and non-conformance rates to record lows, among some other things. So, with that in mind, what programs have you implemented, do you think, that most raise the awareness of quality across your organization in order to achieve those goals?
Well, one of the big things that we had to look at right off the bat was just getting quality in front of the everyday worker. Management knows what they want. They know, they want that quality product. And the everyday worker kind of knows we want to put out a quality product, but they don't necessarily know how they go about doing that. So getting it in front of them, first of all, getting the everyday worker to take some pride in the product, to recognize where it was going. A lot of our workers didn't realize where our product ends up. We're a little family-owned company. We've got a little over 100 employees, but we have a global reach. Our product ends up in Australia and Canada, all over the U.S., Mexico, Germany, you name it, we've shipped product there. We've shipped product to NASA. We've shipped it to the oil fields on the North Slopes of Alaska, all over the place. So just getting our employees to recognize, how important the quality of the product is, because it's going to places where people's lives will depend on it. Once they start to realize that, then we can start working on, we can improve here and we can improve there to make the quality a little better. Start working with some of our welders to improve their skills. Start working with our sheet metal benders so that they run the programs better, so that they're not off that micro inch that they've been off all the time. Just to improve those little things that everybody, it's been working, but we can make it better, and we know we can make it better, and we can improve that quality and recognize the quality, the need of the quality, so that we can make those improvements. See how important that is.
Well, Thomas, let's talk about where the rubber meets the road here. So, how do you get your plant floor employees to really engage and take ownership of quality?
We do a couple things. But the first thing was, again, to make sure they understood the importance and where it's going. And then from there, we started giving them the authority to actually do something about it. So when they do find something that, hey, this just really doesn't meet my standards, I got this from the previous process, and I'm looking at it going, this product's got a scratch in it, or this product is bent off and it's going to make it really hard for us to bolt it in right, or whatever it may be, giving them that authority to just stop the process. hey, I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to put a tag on it. I'm going to call quality. We're going to get it remade or fixed or whatever we need to do. And not just passing it on, not just sending it on through and maybe we'll find it later. But to give everybody the authority to stop that process early, to stop that product, and to make it right from the beginning. That actually had a bigger impact on our processes than just about anything. It also allowed us to not only stop the product early, which drives down the non-conformance repair cost, but it allowed us to identify where a lot of the issues were coming from. A lot of times what we were finding before was things wouldn't get identified early. It'd be caught by a quality tech in final inspection. Well, by giving the ownership to the guys on the floor, letting them catch it early, it gets caught earlier. It's easier to identify where the problem's occurring and then go back and work backwards to correct that, to help with re-education of the guys on the floor, to help make sure that everybody understands how important their individual job is.
So that's kind of talking about approaching it from, let's say, the individual employee level. But what about different departments? How important is it to rope in different departments into the process?
Oh, sure. Every department has to be involved in quality. Quality is a company-wide initiative. It's not, and you're right, it's not just the floor guys. One of the things about quality that, and this goes back to the ISO standards, and you know, it's every department of the company has to be involved. It's got to go from the top down. So engineering, sales, all the way up through finance and IT, they all have to be involved and they all have to see the importance of it. One of my favorite things to do when I get into a meeting with some of the other managers, you know, and early on, I don't have to do this much anymore because they all get it now, but early on it was, you know, we're going to do quality audits. We're going to come around and do internal audits. We're going to hit every department. And, you know, finance or IT may look at it and go, well, why does you have to do that in our department? We're not involved in making the product. Well, that's true, but you do have an influence over the product. And, you know, you can ask those questions. Do you touch the product physically in any way? Well, no. Okay, but what influence do you have over the product or the delivery of the service? You know, how quickly the product gets to the customer? Is it on time? Do you have influence over that? And everybody does. IT is a great example. You know, we talk about influence over the product. If the IT server goes down, engineers can't use their software to design the product. If they can't get the design done on time, production can't start building on time, and then the delivery schedule is affected. So everybody has some influence on that product. Once the managers start understanding that, then you start looking at the different processes that are set up. Okay, we're going to run this process. We're going to actually write it out. We're going to make sure that we're following it. And it's putting everything into writing, and it comes down to do what you say and say what you're going to do. It just becomes much easier to get everybody on board at that point. They start understanding that the ISO standards aren't there just to be met just because we want to meet them, but because they will add value to the company. And we start striving to actually meet those standards, and we see the value that gets added as we go.
Okay, and you've in the couple minutes that we've got left here, you've touched on some key elements, you know, involving the employees, involving all departments. But if you were to say one or two things, three things maybe, that you think were the most important ingredients for developing a culture of quality. So we're talking the culture. You know, how do you change the overall vision of the company when it comes to quality? What are the most important elements, do you think?
You have to hit it from multiple levels, starting with your top level management. Early on, conversations with the CEO, we were ISO 9001 registered to the 2008 standard when I started, but we knew that standard was going away, and to be honest, we were registered because it was something that customers wanted. It wasn't something that we were actually applying well. So those early conversations with the CEO, getting him on board, helping him to understand the value of following that standard, the value of an active quality management system versus a passive system. Once he understood that, once he started to see the value there, then he started talking to the managers, the lower level managers, and hey, this is what we need to do. Let's get on board with this. And then the conversation changed to how can their departments help? So if you start there at the top, and then it becomes, everybody knows what the CEO says, where he drives the bus. Everybody's going to follow. So start there at the top, follow on down to the next management level, and then on down to employees, and you help everybody along the way understand what their input is, what their part in that system is, and make it an active system where everybody has the opportunity to have that input. Everybody has the opportunity to say, I see something wrong, whether it's something with the product or something with the process, something with the system itself. I see something wrong. Give them that voice to say there's a problem, and then address it from there.
So lead by example and make sure everybody in every department is involved. It sounds like that's kind of it in a nutshell.
That's been key for us. And again, we're a relatively small company, but we've got a big reach, and we do everything. It's a manual system. We don't have a lot of automation to it, so it's a people process.
Right.
And getting those people involved is key for us.
Well, Thomas Schulte, a QA technician with Gertz Industries and a winner of this year's Catalyst Award. Congratulations, by the way. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay.
Thanks, Thomas.
You too.
Talk to you soon.
Yep.
Good interview, though. We love those things where we find out
it's nice
real
to talk
world.
to people on the shop floor.
Yeah, really, really good work there done by Gertz Industries. All right. Well, that's our show for today. Thanks again for Neil Polhumus of Stack Graphics Technologies for joining us, as well as we just heard from Thomas Schulte of Gertz Industries there, and thank you to both of them for joining us. Before I wish you all a happy Memorial Day, and of course I do, the day after Memorial Day, of course, we want to remind everybody on Tuesday and on Wednesday and on Thursday of next week, we have 3 very special issues for you of Quality Digest. We're going to be talking about the U.S.-China relationship and very many facets of it.
Right.
The history of it, the quality angles of it, the economics, the political. It's a lot of stuff. We're really proud of this one, a special report. We're delivering it up for you guys, so check that out coming up on Tuesday.
It all ties together, and of course, quality is a key component in there,
woven through the whole thing, so be sure to check that out. All right, well, again, and you all have a great Memorial Day. We'll see you next week.
So long.
Bye.